Good evening. We are in Bangalore. I have a good team of representatives from the IT as well as the telecom sector. Very experienced set of people and from the industry. Starting from my far left, Mr. Rasto Ravanan. He is the CFO of Mindtree Consulting. Then I have Mr. Prabal Roy. He is a Sloan Fellow of the London School of Business as well as a PE investor. And then to my immediate left is Mr. Jagdish Kini. He is a former Executive Director and CEO South of Airtel, as well as now, of course, he runs a consultancy company of which he is the founder director called Enterprise 5C. Let me start by asking Rasto the first question. Difficult times, but what kind of a job do you think the finance minister has done?
Speaking personally, I would say it's a little bit of a disappointment. You had a choice to do a lot of things from a policy standpoint. Like you said, at a national level, we are at a multi-year low on our GDP growth rate. Policy makers could have taken bold steps to spur growth, reduce the friction in the economy, make the unproductive assets more productive. So many things could have been done. I little bit sort of get the feeling that it was a missed opportunity. More populist, more things in the announcement today where a reaction to some of the recent events in the country, etc., doesn't inspire that much of confidence of any growth orientation, any proactive support that the industry was looking for from the government at this point of time.
Would you call it a safe budget, Prabal?
Well, Imran, it's like this, if 6 months ago we were sitting in a room like this, I think we would all have been very happy and welcome this budget coming in an election year. But in the last 6 months, in all fairness, Mr. Chidambaram raised expectations across the world, including India. And to that extent, I agree with Rasto that the expectations were that this would be a path-breaking budget in the terms of, despite difficult circumstances, but the roadmap to macroeconomic stabilization would be set in this budget. You can't achieve everything in 1 year, but the roadmap would have been set. And that would stoke growth, increase in savings, more investments. That, unfortunately, has not happened at all. So essentially, it's an uninspiring budget, but could have been much worse.
Okay. Jagdish, it started with your sector, the investment downfall.
Well, like what Prabal just said, I think Chidambaram raised expectations of every one of us in the country in the last 6 months. A lot has been done in the last 6 months, and especially today, in the first 2 minutes of his speech, he did raise expectations even more. And post those two minutes, I think, well, if you really look at it, it's an incremental budget. When I say incremental, he has increased a lot of stuff for a lot of focus areas, and he's focused rightly so on infrastructure, education, food, health, and the Indian woman. And to me, when nothing much has changed, I would rather look at it as a very stable budget. Okay. And when if I have to really evaluate Chidambaram, then I would say he's lived up to his promises, because he had said that he'll try and keep the fiscal deficit to a certain limit, and I think 5.2% or something is what he has finally achieved. I think that he has lived up to his promise, and I think that's important because the whole world is watching us. We are a growing economy. We are an economy which is being watched by the whole world, and I think stability comes from living up to your promises. And I think the first step of living up to the fiscal deficit, I think Chidambaram has delivered. And now we look forward to him delivering 4.8% next year.
That is, if his government comes to power.
If it comes to power, well, the other thing I would say is that a budget is a statement of accounts. And then a statement of intent. And I think if I have to look for statement of intent in today's budget, it is there. Okay. And hopefully, he and his team has the next 10 to 12 months, or at least the first 6 months of this year to really prove and get in policy matters and policy changes to make sure that things happen. And I really look forward to that. That's more important than the budget by itself.
Oh, okay. Rasto, what is there for the IT sector in this budget?
I would say two immediate negatives. One was definitely the increase in the surcharge on the corporate income, and secondly, the increase in the dividend distribution tax. The dividend distribution tax to me sounds even more contradictory than increase in the surcharge on corporate income. At one level, his earlier announcements indicated that he wanted Indians who save to move away from gold as the traditional saving instrument, move more to financial instruments like mutual funds or equity, etc. And then, if the company declares a dividend, he pockets more of it than what goes to the shareholder who actually invested in the company to deliver results. Doesn't make sense. You're contradicting yourself within a couple of hours of his speech. So both of them, I think, are negative. The one area on which there's a little bit of hope, he has said that he's going to relook at the safe harbor provisions which affect the transfer pricing impact that all of us in the IT industry have, and I'm sure it applies to other industries as well. It's one of the most hotly contested areas. It's one of the most actively litigated areas. It's one of the areas where the transfer pricing officer has so much of discretion, and companies suffer because of that there. If he actually puts something together that is meaningful, and instead of leaving it as a statement of intent that we are going to look at correcting the safe harbor provisions, if actually some meaningful guidelines come and they have taken into account some of the reservations of the industry, that's at least the one area on which there's a little bit of hope. Otherwise, there's nothing really beneficial in any form or fashion in the budget for the IT industry.
No, there are a lot of promises made in the last budget for the IT sector as well in terms of regulations, and there are a lot of clarifications over the course of the last 1 year. Have you seen anything in this budget today which clarifies these doubts of the IT sector?
Sure. No, in the budget itself, at least within the 2 hours of speech, nothing came out. But like I said, especially in budget documents, you have to go through the fine print with a tooth comb so that you haven't misunderstood something or missed something. But within the speech, there's absolutely nothing there. The one good thing for the IT industry was the clarification that came a few weeks back, which said that the largest tax problem was the classification of on-site revenue. Now the fact that that will be counted as software revenue and will not become taxable, and that was definitely a welcome move, because it clearly was unjustified. It just in the statement that he himself made, it was an over-aggressive, adversarial-oriented department that went after companies purely for the sake of revenue collection, irrespective of the merits of the case. So at least that clarification which came a few weeks back was positive. But in the budget itself, again, like I said, qualifying for the fact that we only heard the 2 hour speech, we haven't read the fine print as yet. Within the 2 hour speech, there's nothing that we could feel hopeful about.
Do you agree with this? Is Rajya being very cynical?
He's not been cynical. I'll be far more cynical, actually.
Okay.
Actually, because I will take it a little differently. I mean, by and large, the gist is the same. But you see, from the IT industry side, if you see the approach which the IT industry has taken with this finance minister, it was essentially the expectations were on two fronts. One was the strategic side, the other is the taxation side. And I'll tackle them separately.
Yeah.
On the strategic side, what the industry said was we need a more collaborative approach with the government, and therefore essentially to promote entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Which would then lead to growth, lead to job creation, and all the good things.
Yeah.
And as part of that, IT-enabled services can play a huge role in terms of bridging the developmental gap which exists in healthcare, rural healthcare, in e-governance, in cybersecurity, and areas of that nature, and education, of course. So apart from education, where the outlay was increased to a small degree, nothing else has happened on any of them, actually. And that, I think, is a big disappointment, because it was a win-win for a low-cost solution to all these development gaps which the country is facing. The second thing on the strategic side was, again, related to entrepreneurship, was the creation of a $1 billion fund of funds. So the government puts in a little amount of money and balance can be raised from elsewhere. Again, to promote small entrepreneurs and to promote innovation. Yeah. That too sort of did not see favor with the ministry. And the third was, which people like who run businesses here, because of the rapid change in technology and technology platforms in the IT industry, a lot of effort goes into R&D.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the Section 35 benefits of R&D which is given to the manufacturing sector is not accorded to the IT sector. And that, in other words, hampers skilling, reskilling, development needs. So all these three were towards improving the climate for entrepreneurship, which frankly, I thought could have been done. It was a win-win really. So that none of these got done apart from education. So there's a big disappointment. On the taxation side, like you said, the gap between the legislative intent of the parliament and the implementation and interpretation issues at the ground level between the revenue authorities has been very high in the last 2 years, say, and therefore leading to an adversarial approach with respect to the taxpayer. And this is something which Chidambaram himself has acknowledged in his speech this morning as well. But that needs to translate on the ground. So there are 5-6 issues on transfer pricing, on SEZs, on repatriation of dividends when the funds come in. So at every line item we are getting taxed. The industry is getting taxed, even though it's a zero tax industry, right?
Is the industry being looked at as a super rich industry? Therefore, they should be given this kind of a treatment by the officials in the revenue collection departments?
Again, like I said, if in a lighter way in going by his speech, I hope he doesn't reduce us to the same level that the comment he made against the cigarette industry, saying that every time the finance minister needs extra revenue, where else do I turn to except the cigarette industry? So I hope he doesn't bring us to that same level ever.
Just to build on this point which you just raised, for example, in Finance Act 2012, last year, a royalty on software was brought in with retrospective effect from 1976. So all software purchased from 1976, which is a Microsoft Excel or a Windows or whatever, is now taxed by the authorities. And not only that, the telecom services like satellite links, which go towards production of software, even that is taxed. So telephone charges can be taxed as well. There are some absurd issues like this which came up in the 2012 Act. We had definitely thought that these will at least be rectified in this, until it has not been done. So therefore, while there is an issue about this niche, and this has to stop, because you must understand the competition from the Latin American countries, Philippines and China is so high that the day is not far when investments either will move out from here or they will not come in. So, and that is not good for our fiscal deficit, our current account deficit, rupee, etc., etc. So I think this is an area which we'd urge the finance minister to really take a very close look at.
How big a threat is this to the companies moving out of India?
I think it's quite meaningful and it's quite immediate. You have to look at it in two ways. Indian companies which now need to create more facilities because the industry is growing. You saw the recent NASSCOM projection that the industry growth in 13-14 will be higher than 12-13. So new facilities need to be created, new employees need to be hired, etc. So if that extra investment needs to be made, companies will now evaluate multiple countries before they decide where to put that. So Indian companies will obviously keep this factor in mind. Secondly, international companies which want to set up centers either for themselves or for third parties to create software will no longer view India as a highly attractive destination because the fundamental factor is part of the delivery that we do for our clients is the talent pool and part is the environment. The talent pool that we have is globally mobile. All of us carry passports. It's easy to get a passport because that's also been IT enabled now by one of the largest software companies in the country. I can get a passport, go work out of Vietnam or whatever, any country that you can think of which is a much more favorable investment climate at this point of time. So the advantage that
So where is it that the industry needs government help? Is it in the context of investment or in the context of relief concessions in taxation or in the procedure of revenue collection?
I would say multiple. The lowest hanging fruit is to remove the friction that we encounter on a day-to-day basis. Service tax refunds, for example, or the nature of the way our assessments are done. And I guess I would say the most egregious would be transfer pricing and in various other forms. But that I think is the hygiene factor to allow us to concentrate on our work without getting sidetracked by some of these distractions. At the level above that, I think operational issues, like for example, Prabal pointed out, our industry has been by far the most entrepreneurial if you look at a 20, 30-year history. We were the first industry to democratize wealth creation through stock options. Some of the taxation structures that affect those kind of instruments are very, very anti the individual, anti the sentiment that you can create, saying that, I can take an initiative, I can do something that does good for society, creates employment, and I also need to benefit out of it. I'm not doing it, out of a lack of self-interest. There is definitely an active self-interest when people want to do that. Some of those things promote entrepreneurship, promote innovation, removal of some of the negativities there would definitely help. But I would say fundamentally, even beyond that, the industry is now grown to a certain stage where, the industry also then cannot progress beyond this if the enabling ecosystem in terms of education, in terms of roads, airports, all of those things, telecommunication networks, don't exist.
We are going to see a serious shortage of engineers by 2025.
Absolutely. So the both in terms of the quantity of talent and equally on the quality of talent. You do have eminent industry people in the skill development commission, etc. But you still see so little progress on the ground. Some of those need to be addressed at a fundamental level as well for the IT industry to be able to realize its potential. And the fact is, it can realize that potential in India or it can realize the potential somewhere else. Equally, if India wanted the industry to realize its potential in India, build on the brand India that the IT industry took to the global stage, clearly some of those things would be useful. And just to end this, I would also say he ended his own speech saying that there is so much of a world potential outside, it is up to us to act. And in every single opportunity where things could have been done, if those opportunities are lost, then why are we not listening to ourselves? We have all the wisdom, we have the Vivekananda books, we have studied them, but we still don't want to take the chances given to us to deliver on those learnings. Then how will we progress?
Jagdish, what is your understanding of the budget in terms of investment? Will it attract investment, particularly in your sector? And the whole problem started with your retrospective tax on your arch rival once upon a time.
In the last budget. Well, I think investments in telecom will be a problem because I think the whole industry was really looking forward to a status of getting the status of infrastructure. So I think if telecom was given the status of infrastructure, then possibly it would have been easier to get to borrow money, and therefore the difference in the cost of money, probably that 5 to 6% difference that they would have got, that would have really helped the industry. But now that status not having come in this budget, I really thought in this budget he would make a mention of it and probably give it that status, but he hasn't. Hopefully he should do it in the next few months. Because what I believe and what I understand is that the government is in favor of it. So if they are in favor of it, then it's time they really gave it that status. And if they did give that status, I think the investments will come in because the telecom operators would want to invest. Because it's not that they don't want to invest, it's just that it's far too expensive. And I think the price war has taken it to such a level that the margins are under severe threat. Sure. And the price war which all started because, in my personal opinion, I think it all started because we gave far too many licenses than the market really can afford or needs. You don't need 50-60 players to make sure that the consumer is not taken for a ride. With 7 or 8 players, you can still manage. Even today when you look at it, 10, 12 players in the market, the others are falling by the roadside. But in the 10, 12 players in the market, I think about the top 3 hold about 70% of the market. And if you add BSNL to it, then I think it's more than 80%. So if 80% is there with four of the operators, do you need 15, 16 operators? It can only bring in price wars and take the industry to such levels that it could be difficult to recover.
So where do you see the lapse? Is there a gap in the implementation of policy or in deciding on a policy, whether that there should be something which will attract investment, something that will make the industry grow, something which will clear the air about investment, about
I think
climate in this country?
the government has a role to play in terms of policy making, and the industry has a role to play in terms of implementation. And I think implementation is far more critical than the policy decisions itself. Because it's how you implement these things and these policies which should make the big difference in the economy.
I think there are two angles to your question, Imran. The lapse at one level is just the speed of decision making. Always all of us knew that governments act very slow, but if you look at this particular situation over the last 3-4 years with the number of scams that have broken out and everything else, everybody was so scared to decide, and that obviously added to its own complications. Decisions not being taken, things that you go speak to the regulators, speak to policymakers, they accept the logic, they accept the underlying economics, but still they wouldn't move the particular files and make those decisions because they don't want, like one of the IAS officers said, don't want a raid 10 years after they retire that why did you take the decision that favored A or B or C. So the slowness of decision making is one of the things that continues to sort of lapse there. Secondly, I would say is a little bit of misunderstood, misplaced kind of priorities. Again, all of us have been in the system long enough, so you realize that politicians have to pander to vote banks. It's how they get elected. We are living with it. It's not something new. But you do whatever you need to do to make populist measures to gain society and everything else, gain votes and everything else. They're going to live with that. But do something for us as well. That's the part that is missing. There were all the right noises and reactions.
Are you trying to say that the super rich should not be taxed or should not pay a surcharge?
I don't think it makes any difference to it. If you look at his own statement on the floor of the parliament, we are a country of 1 billion people and 48,200 people have a salary of more than 1 crore. That is absolutely ridiculous. I think there probably are 3-4 zeros missing in that number of 48,200 of people who have a salary, who have an income of more than...
I thought he said the taxable income.
It's a one-time. It's a one-time surcharge of 10%.
Right, so the point is, he would have gained a lot more by making sure that everybody whose income was more than 1 crore actually paid tax. So it looks like so many people exist in the country and all of us know it.
No, he's not going to get more than 13,300
So let's
crores.
assume all of those 48,000.
So why should the super rich have a problem with that is my question.
No, I don't think anybody has a problem. But the issue is not the tax. Look at it logically. 48,200 by his own number. Let us assume on an average everybody had an income of 10 crores per person. So he will get an extra 30 lakhs per person. So on that 48,000, how much money is he going to make? I can vouch with any amount of money that I have that there must be at least 40 lakh people who have a salary or whatever income of more than that who are not being taxed. I think that mentality, like I said, misplaced priority, that you have a set of people who are already currently compliant in some form or fashion. Because that's the only audience that you have, you keep sort of loading them with more and more this thing. It is going to actually, in my view, slowly start reducing the level of compliance even with those people. And there are at least 48,000 people out of 1.2 billion that we have who are getting...
Are you suggesting that it will lead to some kind of more tax evasion?
No, that's not the point, Imran. Like as far as the super rich is concerned, it's strictly on that point, because there were some questions raised on whether they will leave the country, etc., and stuff like that. I fully agree with him. The number of 48,000 sounds very low to me. And let's look at it this way. Even if assuming the number is right, because he has the right numbers, we don't, right? So there are 48,000 people with taxable income of more than 1 crore. In that situation, more than half of them would be professionals.
Yeah.
You have zero evasion, is that right?
Where you have zero evasion, and they have nowhere to go, like lawyers, doctors, corporate sector. Don't include me, you can include him. but so so they'll have nowhere to go. They have zero evasion in that. Then you have the likes of Azim Premji, Narayan Murthy, Mukesh Ambani's of the world. They have too much stake in the country, love their country, so on and so forth. I don't think they will leave for small amounts of the amount of nature. So there is a very minuscule amount which people can think, and question is, where will they go if they leave the country? The tax regimes in France, in UK, which was a favorite for Indians in many years, is actually now higher.
But Mr. Chidambaram is invoking the spirit of Mr. Azim Premji.
Yes, he is. So I don't think it's, frankly, because I'm not affected, I can say, I don't think that's, this is not a very big amount as such. So to that extent, for 1 year, little bit amount he's asked for, I think it's fair. It's fair or not, it's not something which will hurt the industrialists so much so as to be very negative.
What do you
I
think?
think what they're going to earn from that is insignificant.
Correct.
Compared to, some of the names that he's taken, Narayan Murthy or Azim Premji or the Nilekanis or whoever you see, they're doing far more for the country by giving the personal wealth rather than, paying this 10% surcharge. So I don't think they're really going to bother about this 10% surcharge.
Yeah.
But does it really make sense to, in a budget that it's going to contribute that much more?
No.
By his
The roster
own-
is talking about the 48,000, 100 and what?
48,200.
17, leaving Azim Premji, Narayan Murthy and Nilekani and Ambani's and others. He's talking about that section.
Yeah, I mean, most of them are professionals.
So you're saying it basically doesn't make a
I
difference
don't think it's, I think it's
paying 3 lakh rupees or if you're earning 1 crore rupees.
Really,
It doesn't make any difference. But look at his own admission. He said there are 17 lakh service tax numbers issued in the country, but 7 lakh returns being filed. So if that,
Yeah.
it must have taken him and the ministry and all the people involved in the budget some amount of thought process to come up with this extra 10% surcharge on a high income group. If that same effort was gone into other things where the return on that energy is a lot higher, obviously it would have been a lot more productive there. Some of these, the concern with some of these statements is, are these being done to make a statement, or are they being done with some underlying logic to work towards solution of a problem that all of us can see? That's the concern, that each of these opportunities to do something to make a difference, to solve a problem, are being sort of frittered away in a certain sense by just attacking some fringe groups, fringe benefits, rather than anything meaningful.
Well, so the verdict from Bangalore is there is a mixed reaction. Some things are good, but a few things are not very good, but they will still tolerate it for the time being, hoping that Mr. Chidambaram will come out with policy decisions after the budget session is over. Well, I should thank my guests.